Hi, thanks for joining us for another installment of Women at Iowa. I'm your host today, Erin Tiesman. Our guest today is Director of Education at the University of Iowa Museum of Art, Dale Fisher. Thanks for joining us, Dale.
You're welcome.
So we thought
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for coming. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the women's collection at the University of Iowa Museum of Art.
Okay.
Some of these fantastic women that have made huge imprints on the art history and art industry. So I thought talk a little bit about today, and you can go ahead and start off with whatever's interesting. We have here Elizabeth Catlett, I believe.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Whenever I was choosing the works for this show and the artists for this show, I was kind of limited by what images I had available since we've been dislocated with the flood.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our materials that we normally go to as a first step in doing anything, we don't have available to us.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to maybe focus on a few people here. And Elizabeth Catlett was a great place to start. She was born in 1915, and she received her Bachelor of Science from Howard University in 1935. And then she decided that she wasn't getting to do enough artwork, so she went back to graduate school here at the University of Iowa. And she came here to study specifically with Grant Wood
Mm-hmm.
and study painting and printmaking. But she ended up actually getting her Master's of Fine Arts degree in sculpture in 1940. And she was the first person to receive a Master of Fine Arts in sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 1940.
And she's an African-American artist, too,
Yes.
which is it definitely sets her apart at that time.
Right.
Now, I understand she has some sculptures here on campus at the IMU.
She does. At the IMU, there's a sculpture of hers in the lounge. It's called Stepping Out. It's a bronze piece. And it's really nice. It's kind of a stylized female figure. And the thing that I like about it is that it looks kind of a time period. Mm-hmm. It looks kind of Art Deco-like mm-hmm. in its own mm-hmm. way, mm-hmm. but then it also just looks very modernist and abstract as well. And it's just a really beautiful piece.
Great.
And I'm glad that it survived the whole summer last year.
The ordeal.
So
oh my goodness. Now I understand she spent some time in Mexico, so she's kind of a Mexican sculptor. I've seen some of that kind of related to her, and that she's also been noted as kind of having political works.
Right. She's an American artist who has resided in Mexico since 1946. She went there to study wood carving and ceramic sculpture, and then she moved to Mexico and stayed there. And this is in the 1940s. 1946 is when she left. And so given some of the themes of her work in the 1930s mm-hmm. and the 1940s and so on, and her being such a political artist, she was kind of blacklisted in a mm-hmm, sense by mm-hmm. the government, and ended up staying there as an expatriate for all this time. Mm-hmm, and mm-hmm. she was able to start returning to the United States in 1971.
Oh my
goodness. She came back for a big exhibition and visited, and she's been back several times since then. But given the nature of her work and the fact that it has to do with images of black heroes and African American life, mm-hmm. The importance of education and literacy mm-hmm. issues, and just human rights issues, she's just kind of become somebody who bridges this idea of the formal artist, sculptor, printmaker, painter, etc., uh-huh. and kind of a artist who deals with social protest mm-hmm, in some of the work. Some mm-hmm. of the work is really blatantly political, and some of it is more formalist in nature.
So it's kind of during that fiery time period of
right.
art history, especially,
right.
that she was doing some of that work, which is incredible. Now I understand she worked with the Taller de Grafica Popular. I'm not
right.
sure if I'm saying that right.
Right.
Founded in 1936. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So, well, this was a group of printmakers dedicated to using their art to promote social change. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. so she's always had this sort of activist streak to
yes.
her
yeah.
identity and to her work. And so with the prints that we have in our collection, we have quite a few of her prints. They range to everything from just kind of these straightforward figurative pieces mm-hmm. to works that deal more with social issues.
That's great. I'm moving right along here on our list here. We've got Laura Ford, who actually was Welsh. So
right.
what is her connection to the University of Iowa, and can you tell us a little bit about her work?
Well, her only connection to the University of Iowa is that we just have this great piece by hers called Chintz Girl Number 5. And so she's working in the sculptural tradition, but whenever you take a look at the piece and you think of sculpture as being kind of a hard presence because it's traditionally bronze or metal of some kind, wood, stone, whatever, this figure of the little girl that she sculpted is padded and covered in this chintz material. So it has this real domestic aspect to it visually. And then it also looks really soft and like a soft sculpture type of piece. And so she's exploring women's issues in a field that has been traditionally male dominated. The physicality of the act of sculpting historically has been something that men did.
Kind of a male, yeah.
Right.
And I understand she does use some social commentary in her work. And
Right, it's a little more subtle perhaps, than Elizabeth Catlett's, but it's still there.
Okay.
You know, still this idea of looking at feminist imagery. One of the things that Elizabeth Catlett learned when she was at the University of Iowa and had Grant Wood as a professor was he advised her to work with what you know. And so she looked at women and family issues and African American themes and so on. And so that's how she kind of got her foot on her path of a career, and her topic of the content of her artwork was because she was following Grant Wood's advice.
Great person to follow.
Yeah, so in a sense, Laura Ford is sort of doing the same thing and exploring these kind of universal female issues.
Female themes.
Right.
Now we have here Marilyn Levine too. Is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
I always said Levine. I've
Levine,
heard people
okay.
say it both ways. I always say Levine for some reason.
And she did, and hers are very interesting too. She does these realistic sculptures of everyday objects like jackets and boots,
Right.
and things like that. And she's got an incredible background in art and education.
Yeah.
So her work with the UI. Can you tell us a little bit about what's here?
So, one of the things at the University of Iowa Museum of Art that we were very proud of was that we had a ceramic study area in the old gallery space that we had for ceramics, and students could go in there and they could handle the objects. They could put the gloves on and they could handle the objects. Whenever you're looking at a painting, you're just kind of looking at a two-dimensional object straight on for the most part. With ceramics, one of the things that's part of the educational process is kind of seeing how thick the walls are, how the artist made the foot, you know, how the piece sets on the surface or whatever. And so we had a study collection that people could come in and take a look at the artwork. And this Marilyn Levine piece that we had, which looks like a little leather cup, was something that people always gravitated towards because it looks so much like leather that whenever people would handle it, they knew it was ceramic because you'd tell them, but they still kind of questioned it because it was so light, so delicate, and the stitch work in it, the zipper, the metal of the zipper, and so on was just so well done.
That's incredible. Yeah, so she did kind of mock reality with some of her ceramics.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very kind of these degrees of representational in the artwork that we have, the things that look really representational versus the stuff that's kind of more abstracted. She had some very literally rendered pieces.
Yes, I've looked up some of her work, and there's one of a jacket hanging on a wall.
Right,
and
I
it
love
looks, yeah, I do too. It just looks so real. It's amazing. So,
well, and that's one of the things too. People who work in ceramics, they don't realize how accomplished she had to be to get the color of the leather right, using things that were ceramic materials, glazes, that you need the right color, you need the right texture, you need the right kind of surface, whether it's matte or gloss or whatever. You know, she was able to do that. But she got her Bachelor of Science in Chemistry in 1957 and her Master's of Science in Chemistry in 1959 from the University of Alberta. And so she had an incredible science background to start with, which is necessary for people who work in ceramics.
Interesting. That's very interesting. That's probably something people don't usually think of. So a lot of experimentation, I imagine, going into her work.
Right. Building the work is only half of the part, half of the making of ceramic works. You know, the other half is dealing with the surface. So, you know, you have the construction and then you have the surface elements that you put on it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, her art's really incredible. And she taught in Canada and California until 1981 when she retired.
Right.
So,
and she just passed away a few years ago.
And Miriam Schapiro, that brings us to Miriam Schapiro, whose work is also very incredible. And she's kind of known for this form of collage that she called femage, which was using feminist material. So can you tell us a little bit about her? She's got a very interesting background and work with the UI.
Well, in talking about Miriam Schapiro, I'd actually like to go back a little further into the 20th century because we have this incredible painting that I couldn't find an image of. We have this incredible painting by Hannah Hoch, who is a German artist from the early part of the 20th century. And one of the things that she was really famous for was her collage work. So she took all kind of printed materials and made these collages that were somewhat Dada, somewhat surrealistic at the beginning of the 20th century. And then fast forward to the 1960s and 1970s, and Miriam Schapiro starts working in collage in a sense, but she starts working with fabrics and textiles and making works that will end up kind of being the thing that she's known for. One of the things that I like about her entire body of work is she started out doing these sort of expressionist brush on paintings that are kind of like the action painters, like Willem de Kooning and Joan Mitchell and people like that. And then in the 1970s, she started working with this collage type of work, which really set her apart. We have a work in our collections called Connections, and it's basically a large grid, and she did these hard-edged, different colors of paint in it. And just like the male-dominated painting of mid-century America, these color field paintings, she was doing that. And then right on top of her grid, she basically attached these really delicately sewn handkerchiefs and lace things and so on. So she's basically taking this form that's been established in the middle of the 20th century and putting a feminist overlay on it.
Incredible,
so,
incredible.
You know, that was one of the great pieces that we have of hers. We have a few of hers in the collection. Some things that are the femages that are like fans. They're kind of semicircular and have this radiating pattern and so on. We have a lot of really nice things in the collection. One of the things that I've really enjoyed in the past few years since I've been here was we had an exhibition of her work, and she and her husband, Paul Brock, came back, and she gave a talk and so on, and we got to talk with the artist, which was great. And they have a history of being at Iowa, though, because Miriam Schapiro studied at the University of Iowa from 1943 to 1949. She got her MA in 1946 and her MFA in 1949, and she met her husband, the painter Paul Brock, here. And so they had a trip down memory lane coming back, close to 50 years later or so to give the talks.
That's great.
Around their exhibitions.
It seems like a lot of these women so far are very experimental, and I think that's really interesting, coming from such a kind of a structured background of men in these fields, like you had mentioned, sculpture, kind of just been very male, and there's very much a formula to it. And these women come in and they kind of break the barrier a little bit.
Well, right, and that's the distinction too. You know, I mean, I'm dealing in broad generalizations here, of course, but in the past, art was a man's world, you know, and so basically art was defined as painting, sculpture, and architecture, and that was it. And anything done with textiles or whatever, it was kind of considered a craft. Ceramics was a craft. Work with textiles and fabric and so on, whether it's interior design or clothing or weaving or whatever, it was a craft and so on. And that started breaking down at the end of the 20th century. The divisions between high art and craft are sort of becoming less important at this point.
That's really incredible how that's kind of developed over the years. Now I'll move on, and if Maria Martinez, who's also got an incredible history with ceramics and pottery, and as does her husband Julian, who was also a potter and very revolutionary in his techniques. So can you tell me a little bit about her? And she's got an incredible background in her work.
Well, Maria and her husband Julian, they have an interesting history because there was a division of labor. A moment ago, talking about Marilyn Levine, I was saying there's the construction, then there's the surface decoration. Maria did the building, and Julian did the painting on the surface.
Interesting.
And so it was one of these kinds of things where it was just this collaboration that extended throughout the rest of his life. And after he passed away, she started working with her son, and the son took on the job of defining the surface of the piece according to these colors of slips, liquid clay that's applied to the surface or whatever. And so she was born in 1887, they think, and she passed away in 1980. And kind of at the halfway point of her life, she was recognized as an outstanding national treasure by the Roosevelt administration in the 1940s. So at that time, in the 1940s, she had already been known for quite a while because she was just learning pottery from her aunt. She watched her aunt do pottery, and that was where her interest came from. But basically, this time in the Southwest, New Mexico specifically, where she lived, they already had manufactured goods. You know, they didn't need ceramics for tableware or dinnerware or anything like that. They didn't serve really any functional purpose at that point. But one of the things that ended up happening was in 1908, Edgar Lee Hewitt, a professor of archaeology at the Laboratory of Anthropology in Santa Fe, he went through the Southwest looking for someone to recreate ancient Native American ceramic vessels, and he basically started having her do this for the museums.
Goodness. That's incredible.
So that's how she ended up getting her career started. She made ceramics before that, kind of as a hobby, but then he ended up engaging her in the process of recreating historic vessels, and then after that process was taken care of, she continued to do her own work, which geographically is a really interesting thing because we're talking about 1908, and this is a short time after the railroads and the trails have been through the Southwest, and people had an interest in going to these places. You know, you had to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, and you don't have to go through the Panama Canal. You can go across the continent itself. And so one of the things that she started doing was sort of catering to the tourist industry in a way, you know, and making these pieces. So that's sort of what she did with her life.
That's amazing. And I understand some of it was very experimental in the beginning. She had to really test kind of how to recreate these pieces that she had been kind of commissioned to do in this kind of very thin-walled ceramic style.
Yes.
And she was a Native American and has very Native American history.
Native American.
Yes. And now I understand this. I found this very interesting. She changed her name to Marie for a short time.
That was just the anglicized version of Maria, basically.
Just kind of trying to, I would imagine, extend her kind of her breadth to non-Native American public. Okay.
Right. I mean, from the late 20th century and early 21st century, we have this idea of the importance of all of these different aspects of the cultural background of artists and so on. But at that time, my guess is she didn't want to be seen as being too exotic. You know, she wanted to be seen as more American because, in a sense, she was American when New Mexico became a state and so on. But then it was later, you know, that the emphasizing the Native American ancestry kind of came back into fashion, really.
Now, her and her husband, while they worked together, did sign their work together as Maria and Julian. And then when she had her son took over, her son's name was on the pottery too.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, interesting.
So that's how they kind of date the pieces. You know, they go through, and given the fact that her career started as an academic project in and of itself, some of the pieces were really studied, and the provenance of the piece was recorded thoroughly. And then a lot of the times it wasn't, because she was so prolific at what she did. The fact that she could knock out one of these ceramic pieces, building it in a very short time, you know, in a matter of a couple of hours, literally.
Oh my goodness.
And that's not to say that they aren't beautiful and the craftsmanship suffers, because it doesn't. She was just such a natural at doing it, that she could accomplish it
Very busy
in
artist.
record time.
Very busy artist. So what brings her art to the UI? What's the story behind her work being here at our campus?
Yeah. Well, the University of Iowa Museum of Art has existed since 1969 as a building, and it existed until last year as a building. But then the university has collected art since the 1840s, whenever the university was founded. And so collections have just been being built. They just became centralized at the University of Iowa Museum of Art when the building was built in 1969. And so, so some of the pieces that we have, they are older than the building, but they're coming into the University of Iowa collection, happened before the building was built too.
That's incredible.
So.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the flood and kind of the experience of rescuing these works from the destruction of those waters. And now now we have a lovely home for the art in Figge Museum in Davenport, which is great to have it somewhere that can be displayed and for other communities to see. So tell me a little bit about the experience of the flood and how it affected you personally, and just take us back if you can, if you want to.
Yeah, the experience of the flood is always kind of surreal to talk about, because it was such a strange week that it still seems kind of like a dreamlike experience. But as best that I remember it, was that on Monday of the week of the flood, they basically told us the water was coming.
Oh my goodness.
Water's coming.
Yeah.
And so then people started figuring out what to do about this. The museum being where it was located next to the river, that had some threatening situations with floods in 1993 and 1973. And so it was a matter of, how bad is this going to be? And they kept predicting the water going higher and higher and higher. And so Jeff Martin, our collections manager, who is basically in charge of moving the artwork, he spoke with Pam White, our interim director, who was in Ireland at the time, by phone.
Oh my goodness.
And they came up with a plan of what to do. And so we had all kinds of people from the museum staff and volunteers and people in the building. We canceled all of our tours and class visits that we had scheduled for the foreseeable future, and just started packing things up. And so the 13,000 pieces in the collection were basically evacuated between Monday and Friday of that week.
Oh my
and
goodness.
They said you have in the building until Friday at 6 p.m. in the evening, but the water came up faster, so we really only had until Friday at 6 in the morning to get things out.
Oh, wow.
And so the pieces were just evacuated, and it's somewhat of a miracle that they were. 13,000 pieces in 4 days, roughly.
Wow.
Packed up and shipped out. So
what was that process of packing it up like? I mean, that must have been emotional, but strategically, how was that done? It was just kind of...
Well, the insurance people, the people who the collection's insured with, they sent people from Chicago to help wrap, you know. So there were people on the staff inventorying things and then taking it to people to pack and so on. So it would be counted, written down, and so on, and then it would be packed, loaded on the truck, and sent. So it was a strange experience.
Definitely.
And then the works went to Chicago, where they've remained in 2 locations. And people on our staff, the curator and Jeff Martin, the collections manager, they went to Chicago and looked at the work and have checked it out and so on. And then our director was talking with the director of the Figge about the possibility of exhibiting some of the works there and housing some of the works there. And so that's where we are at this point, at this state of the game. The staff is, Well, you know, I mean, everybody has their own little idiosyncratic ways of dealing with things, but we've all had our strange little periods of where it's finally hit home and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
And so for some people that happened right after the flood. For some people, like me, it's just happening now after all these months.
Yeah.
Now is whenever I'm kind of getting jittery about it. Because one of the things that we have happening to us is people in the community, they will ask, well, what is the staff doing? You know, there's no building and the collection's not here. What is the staff doing? You know, well, we're doing everything that we always did as best we can. It's just the degree of difficulty is a lot greater now. So it takes a lot more time and effort to do everything. So it's been an interesting learning experience.
Definitely, definitely.
After the flood, whenever we kind of got settled, after moving a few times, we basically started figuring out what we could do. And I started calling other museums and talking to people in their education department and saying, now, what do you do whenever something like this happens to you? And people are saying, I don't know what to tell you. You know, nobody's really ever had this happen to them. Even New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Museum of Art got up on its feet faster than we are going to.
Yeah,
So,
there's really no protocol. It was
Right,
very,
right.
kind of just everyone had to bind together and
Right,
try to make it work.
exactly.
That's incredible. So what's kind of your reaction now that it's at the Figge? I understand Davenport, the community is very excited about having the art there.
They are excited about having the artwork there. Well, I have really mixed feelings about it, you know, because I've worked with these works for 6 years at the time of the flood, now 7 years, and to have them return to the Figge, I know logically in my head that it's a great thing and that people get a chance to see the work and that it's much better for the work to be hanging in a gallery than sitting in a warehouse being nothing but stored. So there's that part of me that really thinks that's a great thing. And then there's that part of me that misses it a lot, you know, misses having our collection to do our jobs with. And, you know, so it's a great thing that it's there, but I still have this kind of mixed feelings about it, this kind of sadness about the flood.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now, what do you know anything about like the timetable and kind of when you'll get to have your work back and be around it again, or?
No, no. This has been an incredible experience for the whole community and so on. And so the decisions about building a new museum, where will it be if it's not on the floodplain and so on, all of those decisions are being made by further up the administration than the museum staff a lot of the times and all of that. And I mean, I'm thankful I don't have to make those decisions. Boy, I wouldn't want to do that.
That would be rough.
You know, I'm thankful that they're doing it, these people who have greater experience with that kind of thing. But basically the last year, since we can't bring students to the museum, we've tried to do everything we can to take the museum to the students. So the docents, our volunteer docents, have been doing a lot of outreach visits to classrooms and so on. And so we kind of put together a roadshow version of our collection, but so much of the museum going experience is going to the museum and being in the presence of all of this great work in a very specific setting, in a very specific institution. And there's no recreating that without a building or the collection.
Well, hopefully that all works out in the near future and we can have our art back on our campus.
Well, one of the things that's ended up happening, though, is that we are bringing some art back to the campus. There are a couple of hundred works on paper and special collections that classes are able to access.
Great.
In the upcoming school year, we're going to have some space in the Ritchie Ballroom at the IMU.
Oh, great.
And so we'll have some works in there. Some of the greatest hits of the ceramic collections and things like that we use for teaching purposes and so on. So we're bringing it back a little bit at a time, but 13,000 pieces and some really large ones like the Pollock
Oh,
mural, which
goodness.
is 16.5 feet or 16 feet 9 inches long by 8 feet tall. There's only so much you can bring back whenever you really don't have a
Yes,
space.
yes.
When space is at a premium and you have people all over campus who are doubled and tripled up in spaces because of the flood. So
Well, I understand the Pollock. I had read an article in the Davenport newspaper that they had to actually carry it up the stairs because the
They did.
elevator that they used to bring the art to the different floors was not large enough for the Pollock.
They did.
So they had to carry it by hand, and it's 800 pounds or something. I think I want to say 800, 900 pounds.
It's
they said
pretty
with
heavy.
the backing,
It's
yeah,
it's pretty
they had 12
heavy.
men carrying it.
Yeah.
That's what the article
Yeah.
said. Oh my goodness, up a flight of stairs or 2 or 3.
Right.
So a little bit about the women's. Miriam Schapiro is still alive, and have you
Yes.
had any? Have you heard any responses from some of these women whose collections you do have here, in
No.
terms of the flood? Or
No, I haven't personally. I don't know that the director or the curator or anyone else has, It's just kind of a strange thing because one of the things that people will tend to think, since the flood isn't on the news every night anymore, people tend to think things are back to normal, and they're really not. So, some of these folks that we were talking about, I haven't heard anything, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
or they're not thinking about it.
Right.
There's a lot of untold stories then, kind of within
yeah.
all the different places on campus that have been affected, and
Right.
covering that it would be interesting to see that kind of
Right.
response and just as an example, what you were talking about, the UIMA and what it's going through in terms of this kind of seeing the Figgy adopt this kind of separation anxiety from the art that's now
Right,
located
right.
in a different city.
Right.
So it's very interesting. So I guess I'm kind of nearing the end of the show here, but kind of some final thoughts or closing thoughts about some of these women and working with the collection and your experience here at the UI and what it's been like.
Well, one of the things that I think by talking about these women and that I've learned over this past year is that without being in the museum and without having the works right here beside you, you can't really represent these women that well. Me sitting here talking about them, it's not the same as talking about them with the work there. And so just the idea of talking about these without the images, it's been a really disorienting experience, as the entire year has. But whenever I thought about being on this show, and whenever Renee Supel asked me to be on this show, I tried to talk her into having some of the women on the staff do it instead of me. Not because I don't want to be here, but just because, I'll be flipping channels and I'll see this show and I'll wish I'd said things differently. So, this idea of representing these women, it's just a great honor to do that in the collection and to bring these works to the public and students and everyone else. And so I look forward to the day whenever we can do that again. But I was also thinking about how my life has been kind of in these workplaces where women tend to be the entire population. When I taught K through 12, I was in the elementary school building, and all of the other teachers were women, and so it was the principal and me. We were the two guys. And so basically I changed a lot of light bulbs, and they fixed cookies and stuff for me and all that. It was a nice
Division of labor
it was
there.
a nice thing. And then now we have a lot of women on our museum staff, and I teach a class through the College of Education, and every student in there is female at this point.
Oh my goodness.
Because it's future elementary school teachers.
Yeah.
And so it's and all of the docents, come to think of it, all of the docents except for one happen to be female. So being on Women at Iowa isn't that unusual, come to think of it. It felt different, but it's not really that unusual. So.
Yeah. So any closing thoughts about the last year and kind of reflection of your experience and where you hope to see the next year, 5 years go in terms of rebuilding?
Well, that's one of the things, it is going to take a while to do. And this year, in a sense, has gone really fast, even though it's been a hard year. It's gone really fast. And so I look forward to just having the museum back and having a collection back on campus to meet the mission that we set out to do. And one of the things that people have told me, because I've lived in Iowa City for 7 years now, people have said, you know, well, you're not really at home in Iowa City till you've been here for 10 years. That all changed for me with the flood. Once the flood happened and all of this, I felt way more protective and way more like it was home than I did before the flood. And so it's really a nice thing to have people out there advocating on our behalf. Our members council people, our docent group, our donors, our volunteers,
Definitely.
all of these people who are really pulling for you and are appreciative of the value of what you bring to the community.
Definitely.
That was one of the things that I knew before I moved here, you know. Don't apply for jobs at places that you don't want to live. And so I thought Iowa City was a great place. And so, you know, one of the things is because of the commitment to arts in the community, all the way from the K through 12 level through the university level to the population who
Definitely.
make this their home. And so, I mean, I think that's a great thing in and of itself. And that's a great asset that is immeasurable. It's not tangible and it's immeasurable, but it's definitely there. So
That's great.
that's a great thing.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing all of your expertise on your experience with the UIMA and kind of this transition period we're going through now since the post-flood. I thank you for your remarks. I really appreciate it. So thanks for joining us today.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. Please watch next time. Have a good day.